So the suggestion is that the rallies in Glasgow involved a group called Scots Active. This seems to be quite robustly reported news. Whether these are the same people involved in these, if you like, putting my hands in inverted commas, your black shirt events in Glasgow and Edinburgh, you couldn't be sure, but the aesthetic is very similar.
A series of silent protests and parades have been held in Scotland by groups who appear to be modelling themselves on the fascist Blackshirts. Columns of masked men dressed in black have appeared outside the Scottish Parliament and Glasgow Cathedral. Online, images and videos of the gatherings have been posted alongside pictures of the British fascist Oswald Mosley. Well, David Leask is a reporter for The Times in London, and he's been looking into this, and he joins me now. Hello, David.
Morning, Hugo.
Look, tell us a bit about what's been happening. What have people been doing? What's been seen?
So what's been happening is kind of caused a lot of people a good deal of consternation, but not everyone seems to understand what's going on. But essentially, over the end of June, there were a couple of events, both in Glasgow and in Edinburgh. And what happened was that scores of men, all dressed in black, filed into, first of all, the Cathedral precinct in Glasgow, and then outside the Holyrood Parliament. They did so in files of 4, dressed all in black, carrying a wreath. And on this wreath it said, "We apologise." On the first event, the wreath also had a note in Italian, which said, "The ends justify the means." Now, there's been kind of a lot of talk about this on social media. This hasn't really been in the mainstream media till now. A lot of people suggesting that these parades looked like black shirts. In fact, interestingly, a lot of people on social media immediately reacted with remarks like, "Hurrah for the black shirts." So that's essentially what we know. What I thought was quite striking is that videos of these events were kind of published on social media in black and white. And they had this kind of look, Hugo, of a 1920s newsreel from Italy, grainy black and white pictures of men in black marching in Scotland.
Has there ever been anything like this before in Scotland? Because I know Scotland there are and have always been some sort of far right elements in Scotland, often linked to elements of sort of football sectarianism as well. Is this sort of perceived to be a new group and a new phenomenon, or just like maybe an old group in different clothes?
That's a good question. I wish I knew the answer exactly to that. What I would say, Hugo, is you'll remember yourself that there's always been a tradition of fringe unionism, of fringe British nationalism within certain parts of our football sport, most notably Rangers, but not only Rangers. And there's also been a degree of sectarian football hooliganism on both sides of the old firm, that's Rangers and Celtic. But this maybe isn't something that's new, but it's maybe something that's been refreshed from a long time ago. I think some people remember, for example, Oswald Mosley of the 1930s in England. Think of the Battle of Cable Street, the big confrontations between, if you like, British black shirts and the police and other authorities in London. But perhaps we forget there was also a black shirt movement in Scotland, especially in Glasgow, and this was closely connected to the razor gangs of the 1930s. The 30s, the most famous of which, of course, was Billy Fullerton's razor gang, the Billy Boys from Brigton in the east end of the city, which was very much a kind of a Protestant gang, but which later on became, if you like, the security wing of the British Union of Fascists. So when we've spoken to people, many of whom don't want their names in the paper, I should say, about what's been happening recently, they describe this as being an echo of things that happened 90 years ago in Scotland.
But I mean, even then, this was British nationalism in Scotland rather than Scottish nationalism, right?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Tell us a bit about where they laid the wreath. Who were they laying the wreath to?
Well, this, Hugo, fascinated me, and I think a lot of other people. So the first wreath was laid in the Glasgow precinct, or the Cathedral precinct in Glasgow, at a monument to a man I think most people probably have forgotten, who was called James Lumsden. Now, James Lumsden was a Lord Provost of Glasgow in the 1840s. He was famous in his day, I think, for being a publisher of children's books. So hardly, if you like, a pin-up for the modern far right. So why would they lay a wreath at somebody who died in the 1840s? Now, the honest answer to that is that people are speculating about this. I think some people that we've spoken to are suggesting that's because James Lumsden was the last Lord Provost of Glasgow before mass migration from Ireland after the famine, which took place in the 1940s. And of course, while often in British discourse, immigration revolves around people who've come from elsewhere in Europe or the world, in Scotland, of course, back in the day, it was often prejudice against immigrants was aimed at people of Irish or Catholic extraction.
Well, that does indeed begin to sound quite football linked in a Glasgow context, does it not? Yeah. Look, I mean, there were some assaults on people of colour in Glasgow following those attacks in Belfast the other month. Is this believed to be linked to that at all?
The honest answer is we don't know. Our colleagues at the Daily Record newspaper the other day published a story in which they suggested that some of the people who organised the if you like, the anti-immigration rallies that took place in Glasgow, during which people of colour were randomly targeted in the street. The Daily Record suggested that these some of the people behind these rallies were involved with groups called active clubs, which is something which our colleagues in England in the Times have been writing about there too, which is seen in the United States and also in Europe. These are clubs of young men, usually white, who would go into the woods, if you like, to train for the future race wars, to be ready for violent confrontations. So the suggestion is that the rallies in Glasgow involved a group called Scots Active. This seems to be quite robustly reported news. Whether these are the same people involved in these, if you like, putting my hands in inverted commas here, black shirt events in Glasgow and Edinburgh, you couldn't be sure, but the aesthetic is very similar.
Sure, understood. Well, that's what a fascinating and disturbing story. I'm sure we'll keep across it. David Leask, thank you very much indeed. David is a reporter for The Times in Scotland.